Good morning, hello. This is going to be a much longer video. I've finally found a way it was very simple in the end, to verify my account with a phone number, which means I can put up videos of more than 15 minutes. At least I hope it's going to work. I mean, I've done the bit that says it should. So this is going to be a longer one in which I'm bringing together the strands, the strands of recent videos and consolidating them and adding some extra things. And it's all around these cases that have been chosen, firstly by the hospital, or consultants I should say, stroke police here, which then gets sent to Dewi Evans. As a quick side note, thanks very much, so much for all the comments out there, all of them. Anything that generates conversation, anything that's a catalyst to conversation, that's the whole point of why I'm doing these videos. That's what it's about. It's about the conversation below as much as anything. And that's what's happening over on Twitter. You've got lots of different people throwing in different things, asking questions, and it creates this very powerful energy moving towards people putting their minds together, questioning each other, challenging each other. Is that true? Is that true? So we're building up a store and a wealth of knowledge about this case, which you wouldn't find in the mainstream media, obviously. Second side note is that I'm reading all the comments, as many as I can, and I will eventually read them all. I can't always reply, and I would want to reply to them all at great length, but I can't do all. There's a time factor, but also I'm getting some quite strong RSI in my hands, which I've had a problem with that in the past, so I've got to be careful. But I'm reading and valuing them all and making notes as to what people are saying for future videos, and to put on tweets on Twitter and to take elsewhere, whether it's Science on Trial or, to discuss it with, or put it as a comment on the Law, Health and Tech Substack that Dr. McLachlan runs. And so I just wanted to assure you that I'm reading and valuing your comments incredibly. And I think you are between each other. Obviously, that's what's happening. And that's the purpose of this. It's a kind of a market square of ideas about this case, that most people that comment on it are troubled by it, and other people who aren't troubled by it, well, they can put their comment there as well. I won't ever delete any comments. It's not for me to do that. So people can the conversation is self-perpetuating, and that's what we want. So this is going to be a longer video. I want to start with it, and I'm going to start with it in terms of medical records. I've got a little bit of experience there. I worked in a hospital for a short time, and I happened to be in a mother and baby unit in Bedford called the Signet unit at the time. I assume it's still there. But part of my job was looking at medical records and going to an outside storehouse and collecting them. And it was a massive, huge room, and obviously they're being increased all the time, and sometimes the older ones have to go off site completely, or a bit further away anyway. This one was on the hospital complex. I mean, you've got some in the unit itself, the ones that are kind of being actively used, and then they've got to all go back constantly to this storage. But just looking at the BMA website, we're talking about hospital records here, hospital maternity records, which would apply to all the aspects of maternity, and obviously the neonatal ward, obstetrics, all that kind of thing. Now, there's a statutory requirement for the hospital records to be kept maternity records to be kept for a minimum of 25 years. This is on the BMA website, after the birth of the last child. And this will come up in a minute. The idea is that the original records have to be kept with the hospital. That's their legal duty to keep them. They're not going to send the original records out to the police, which then might get lost, and then they've broken their statutory duty. They're not going to do that. Right, so I've said that. Okay, I'm referring to notes here. This is quite a very detailed set of notes I've written for this, because I wouldn't be able to carry it in my head. So an initial question is, who physically handed over or posted the bundles of these medical notes for the 30 plus cases to the police? Or did the police come and collect them? I answer these questions in a minute. because of what I found out, or I extrapolate from what detectives have said as what has happened. Or were they sent by some special postal delivery? Now, and this is where it comes a bit more clear. Detective Kennedy says, this is a female detective, in the first 5 minutes or so of the Operation Hummingbird Cheshire Police video, the 50 nearly hour video, which is not an easy watch. But anyway, she says it's just in relation to all the medical notes that they received, this massive welter of notes, sometimes up to 1,000 pages, she said, for one of the cases, and they've got more than 30. She said it's just the way they were brought to us. When she describes the state they were in, the disorder, it's just the way they were brought to us. So that suggests some kind of courier, special courier, obviously. They need to look after these things. And it obviously suggests physical copies, and there's a ramification to that, of course. So we go on here. We can assume that they were in hard copy from the hospital to the police. As Detective Lucy Kennedy describes them in the Hummingbird video as, quote, it's been described as the medical files have just been thrown up into the air and just put back together. And she does this gesture, like she does that, and then she does a physical gesture. My question about that is, who has described them as that? Who's described them as that they've been thrown up? Is it a general feeling among the team? It's been described as the medical files have just been thrown up in the air and just put back together, she mimes the gesture. And they go on and they make much of this, and she makes much of it, is that they had no idea what any of it meant. They don't know what the terms are. They're not medically minded. And they needed an expert to solve this for them, or to interpret it for them. They don't know what any of this means. They don't know what any of it means. Right, so another question that came up was that the totality of the records that they were sent? Were they sent a mixture of electronic and physical records? I don't know. Detective Kennedy, goes on to say, it was hard for us to fathom how to put this medical bundle together, which also was a challenge for the expert who then received it, the expert being Evans. Some of these medical records are 1,000 pages long. We then took it to him. That was an interesting thing that really struck out. There's so many, you'll see now. We then took it to him. What does that suggest? It suggests picking up these physical copies that they were physically sent from the hospital, the ones that had been thrown up in the air and landed. Files had been thrown up there, and took it to him. But in the Talk TV interview, Evans says he received them all electronically. So which one is true? Is it a small thing, or is it a small thing? What does it mean? Does it mean anything? They say they took these files to him. They didn't send them electronically. But he says he got them all electronically. He said he got them all electronically, and they were in such a shabby state that he had to print them out again. Shabby state electronically in terms of disorder, being upside down, he says, not in date order. Always terrible state they were in then. And he says it was very shabby, very shabby. Right, so she goes on to say, we took them to him, so that's a contradiction from what he says, for him to review, and he would decide whether there was a suspicious case or a non-suspicious case. Just a sidebar note here. In the Operation Hummingbird video, the same detective, Kennedy, says that they had eight experts on board and one independent nurse advisor. But as we see throughout this, Evans is really the only person they seem to use to make the determination whether the cases are suspicious or not. He's like a one-man band. They've got 8 of them, and the nurse advisor, so that's 9. So out of that 9, Evans he's doing it all, really, isn't he? it raises the question, what are the other 7 experts doing, and what's the independent nurse advisor doing? I mean, Evans takes care of business on his own, doesn't he? For the whole thing. Back to a note regarding the timeline from what Detective Kennedy says. She says that in July 2017, they have a meeting with, quote, the witness, and they're talking about Evans here. And the police then have the massive task of putting together the bundles for him, i.e. Evans, to look through for all the different cases that we wanted him to review. That we wanted, i.e. the police wanted him to review. Well, I'd take issue with that, really. I mean, ostensibly it's that, but what actually is it? It's the ones that the doctors have chosen and set the parameters for. But there's a finesse about that later on that we'll come to see about that as well. Whether it is wholly the doctors that have chosen them, and why. Why have these 31 cases, or 32, however many, 30 plus cases, been chosen? We know it's more than 30. So these policemen saying, Kennedy saying here, we put the bundles together that we wanted him to look through. Well, they've already told us they don't know anything about the medical world, medical terms, or anything that this means. So on what basis is it them telling the expert what to look through if they don't know shit from Shinola about anything at all to do with medical records and what the terms mean and what the values of these terms mean in terms of these individual cases? What does that mean, The truth is, in terms of, well, at least half of these cases, we'll come to the finesse part later, and it's very interesting, I think. They're being completely led by the consultants, the gang of 4, all of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, does it matter? The gang of 4, essentially. Dr. Breary, Dr. Jayaram, Dr. Gibbs, and the mysterious female doctor, Dr. B. So, as I say here, well, which one or ones of those gang of 4 were directly involved with choosing those cases? I mean, Breary's a good choice because he's the one that had the initial suspicions following the concentration of deaths in June 2015. But Gibbs, as the most senior consultant, who's apparently not there that much, when he might have overseen the cherry picking, or it could be a combination of all the 4 consultants. Either way, back to the notes. Evans in the Talk TV interview says that he was sent them from the police electronically, so that contradicts what Detective Kennedy says, that they brought them to him. You don't say that about sending emails, do you? Or sending things electronically. You don't say you brought something to someone. That's a bit of an issue. So, if it is the case, if Evans is not lying, I mean, if he's not lying when he says he was sent them electronically, I'm not saying he is, I'm just saying there's a disparity here. It must mean that the police scanned in all the documents that they were sent from the hospital into a computer, this massive thing that was all thrown up in the air, all the files that were thrown up in the air and in great disorder, they scanned them in. So that was a massive task they had subsequent to the July meeting in order to create these bundles for Evans. Evans also then, in the Talk TV interview, bemoans how out of order they were, upside down, and in a very shabby state, as he says, And this is the material he's going to work on to make his reports, this shabby material that he has to print off in order to make sense of them, he says. Clearly the police had not done much to improve the organisation of the records prior to sending them to Evans, because they see them as a mess. He gets them from the police and they're still a mess. Maybe we can forgive the police because they don't know what these records mean. They keep telling us that. They need the expert. They both blame the NHS for the state of the records, the disorder of them. The police suggest it, this thing about being thrown up in the air. And Evans explicitly, in one of his many digs against NHS management, he explicitly states it when he said, "This is what I and the police had to put up with," he says. Question that came to me now. Can we deduce from all this that the police never had sight of any original records from the hospital, the physical copies of the original records, but that they were only sent photocopies that someone in admin at the hospital had done for them? Well, as because I've said before that there's a statutory duty of the hospital to keep those records, they wouldn't have sent the originals. They wouldn't have sent the originals to the police, and the police don't know what they all mean anyway, so they're not going to go there. The police aren't going to be looking at the originals, are they? They're relying on the admin team of the hospital to photocopy them and send them by courier. That's what's happened as far as we can deduce. Are there any issues with that in terms of that admin process about what might have been left out from those records? How do we know that the complete records were sent? How do we know that? How does anyone know that? You know, what was there interference there about what should and shouldn't be sent to the police? Was the totality of the records sent to the police that were photocopied? Was there interference by someone or some people within the hospital? Maybe one of those consultants. We don't know. Be interesting, wouldn't it? About what they might want to leave out. I'm not saying they did, but there's room for it to happen, you know. The further point is, you know, the police keep telling us, understandably, it has to be said, that they don't know anything about medical matters or medical terms. So, in any case, what would they be able to tell anything different from the originals if they even had sight of them and went there and looked through them in this massive long room that it probably would be, where all the medical notes are kept? Or indeed the copies, actually. They just don't know. They're in a position where they have to trust the doctors in everything, have to trust to be led by the doctors. They're not performing an independent investigation at all of their own. They're reliant wholly on what the doctors are telling them. And when I say doctors, I'm talking about these consultants. They're being led by the NHS, essentially, but led by, in particular, those consultants. A further point regarding the medical records is not only that were the complete records photocopied in the admin task, were any missed out, it's not only that, is were they complete at all? How well were they kept within the unit? Did things happen on the unit that just simply weren't recorded? Well, I think that's almost inevitable. So how complete were they a representation of actually what happened? I've got to refer to my notes. How good was the record keeping? This is important in all the cases of death and collapse. You know, these are just sort of, what are they? They're kind of sketches around what happened. I mean, you know, okay, they've made certain records, but were they all made? You know, we're relying on human systems that are fallible, and that there's gaps and there's mistakes and there's deliberate omissions as well for all sorts of reasons. And going back to the video of last night about the imminent negligent cases that were hanging over that unit and hanging over that hospital, it might be in their interests to not have complete records of what happened in certain cases. I'm not saying that they did, but you could understand that's a potential there when they're worried about negligence cases. It wouldn't be the first time records go missing that could end up being damning for people. So it might sound I'm labouring this point, but this is the records, the cases, are the heart of the matter that produce the case, that produce the charges. It's all this. It's all to do with what is chosen by those consultants, sent to the police, sent to Evans, and what Evans makes of them, allegedly independently. Without that, there's no case. Without that, there's no trial. Without that, there's no conviction. So this is where it all matters, rather actually than what happened at the trial. It matters what happened at the trial, but this is where the rot is. This is where the rot and the corruption of this case all begins, And once it's on that train of corruption, it never gets off it, and it leads to this, what I believe is a false conviction. The further point is that if we understand and if we believe that the police have physical copies and they do the scanning operation, that's their admin team. So how well was that done? How do we know how well was that done? How do we know what might have been missed off there deliberately or accidentally? Because they were scanned into a computer, presumably by the police, and then sent to Evans. And he received them electronically. So now we go back to the crux of which cases were chosen, which babies or events were chosen by the consultants at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Who else could it be from there? To send to the police. Now, we don't have a definitive number here. As Evans states, it was over 30. I've seen various reports of it being 31 or 33. Excuse me. Why Evans can't give the number in the Talk TV interview is somewhat strange to me. Why the approximation? So, when the police detectives say that they send bundles regarding the cases of the events, deaths or collapses, that they, the police, wanted Evans to look into and decide if they're suspicious or non-suspicious. This is not true. I hope that came across right. I was reading it. So when the police say that they send bundles of these cases that they want Evans to look into and decide if suspicious or non-suspicious, this is not true, because the police have told us that they're they're non-medical people. The police have told us they're not medically minded. They don't understand anything. They don't understand any of the terminology, and they're quote-unquote not medically minded, as Detective Kennedy says. So Evans is being sent, not really what the police want them to look into, but what the consultants want him to look into. And only, and this is crucial, only what the consultants want him to look through and to decide. They're deciding the parameters of what's being looked into by Evans, not the police. Again, caveat, there's a finesse about that coming later. The consultants, from the beginning, are setting the parameters for the investigation and the parameters of what will and will not be looked through, with this caveat that's coming. And the consultants already know and have agreed between themselves that they want all the cases where Lucy is highly involved to be looked through, because they've been focusing on those very cases and events, deaths and collapses, where Lucy is involved. For the best part of 2 years they've been looking at those. They know them all off the back of they know them all verbatim. They could list them all. They know them. It's not a mystery for the consultants about what they want Evans to look at. Not what the police want Evans to look at, what they want Evans to look at. So this 2-year period, it goes back to the very first review that Breary orders after the quick successions of deaths of babies A, C and D and the collapse of baby B in June. So these consultants already know what they want looked at by the quote-unquote independent expert, who doesn't like being called an expert, by the way. It's too flash for him. The police don't know. The police don't know. The police are told. They're told. So we end up with 30 plus cases. Now Evans, this is a quote from Evans from the Talk TV interview. He goes, "So I received a copy of the clinical notes of over 30 babies," why doesn't he say the number, "who had either died or had collapsed during between January 2015 and July 2016. And I looked at all of them. Some of these cases you could understand why the babies had died. They died from the usual problems of small babies, hemorrhage, infection, and some congenital problem, for instance. But I identified 15 babies, whose collapse or death I could not explain as a natural cause. And in addition to that, their collapse not only was unexpected, ... He goes on then to talk about his theory of air embolus, which from the medical and scientific point of view is having now a whole raft of arguments built up against it, which should have been produced in court by the defence, and which wasn't, and which should have been produced by the defence via the form of expert witnesses of their own, but they didn't. And that leaves the question open, obviously, as to another reiteration of the question, what the hell were the defence doing? I'll read that Evans quote again without the accent. So I received a copy of the clinical notes of over 30 babies who had either died or had collapsed between January 2015 and July 2016, and I looked at all of them. Some of these cases you could understand why the babies had died. They died from the usual problems of small babies, hemorrhage, infection, some congenital problem, for instance. But I identified 15 babies whose collapse or death I could not explain as a natural cause. And in addition to that, their collapse was not only unexpected, and then he goes on to talk about air embolus. So looking at that quote, hearing that quote, thinking about it, what's the obvious question that springs out? Well, to me, why did the consultants choose over half the cases stroke babies, so a case is a baby in this instance? Why did they choose over half the records that they sent were for cases stroke babies, which were then sent to the police and then sent on to Evans, where the cause of collapse or death was so easily explainable? Why would they waste that time and effort? What was their reasoning to do that? I made a bit of a dog's dinner there, so I'll just say again. So why did these consultants choose these easy to dismiss cases where you got this guy looking at notes who's never met these babies before? You can just go, oh, well, yeah, they're fine. I can get rid of up to 60% of what you sent me here. That's easy, and I'm just left with the 15. Now, it either shows that these consultants are complete fools, but you've got to remember these are the consultants who had actually known these babies, tended to them, had either been on duty when the collapses or deaths happened or heard about them the following day. And they knew a great deal about these babies and their conditions while at the Countess of Chester Hospital. So are these consultants foolish enough to send bundles of notes regarding these babies where there's no question about any suspicious death or collapse? Doesn't that seem utterly pointless that they would do that? Either these consultants haven't got a clue about anything. These consultants, mind you, that knew and worked with the babies, and Evans can, so they don't have a clue, but Evans can, from records that are in a terrible, shabby mess, mind you, and never having met or seen the babies, and up to 2 years later, simply and easily determine that there's nothing to worry about. But the consultants have put them all in because they've got concerns, and Evans goes, oh, there's nothing to worry about there. So why were those cases included by the consultants, the ones that were easily dismissed? It doesn't make any sense at all. And here's the finesse where the police become involved. Well, it's a two-stage thing. I know this is complex, but there's two sets of possibilities here. One with the police, one without. And you'll see. So go back to that bit. That question. Why were those cases included? It makes no sense whatsoever unless the consultants knew very well which 15 from the more than 30 Evans would pick, even before arranging all the notes for the 30 babies to be sent. They would know, what he had whittled them down to and what he would find left over, as it were. And those 15 that he would find left over, that the consultants already knew he would find left over, are the 15 babies. 15 babies that Evans says in the Talk TV interview that the consultants had already suspected Lucy Letby as having caused deliberate harm or murder to. And they'd been suspecting that now, these consultants, for the best part of 2 years. So they knew those cases, those babies, off by heart, all of them. All of the 4 consultants knew them and would have discussed them all endlessly, and they'd brought their concerns twice to management about them. I know I'm repeating some things, but I think it all bears repetition, because it's this thing that you worry over and you think over, and it doesn't make sense. You've got to... So why include, this is the consultants now, why did they include the 15, 16 or 17 other easy cases for Evans to dismiss? Evans could easily move past them, leaving him, Evans, amazingly, with the very 15 cases about which the consultants suspected Lucy Letby and had reported those suspicions to management as a matter of record. So my hypothesis is this, and it doesn't take Einstein to work it out. Those 15 plus easy to dismiss cases were deliberately chosen by the consultants, and I keep saying this, I give another reading of this coming later on, and I'll leave it to you to obviously to decide which you think is more compelling and which is more likely. Let's start with this one first. Those 15 plus easy to dismiss cases were deliberately chosen by the consultants to give the impression of an unbiased investigation, which was not just focusing on Lucy in a prejudicial way, but was considering a much wider span, so that they being perhaps both the police and the consultants, so they could not later be accused of just going after Lucy, which is precisely what they'd been doing for the previous 2 years before the police had got involved. That's exactly what they've been doing. And here comes to the second option of the hypothesis. It kind of bifurcates. The further question is here, was it their idea, the consultants, or was it their idea alone? Was there a mutuality to the idea of seeding it with like 60%, 16, 17, 18 cases Evans could easily dismiss, to give the fig leaf impression that it was an open and fair and broad investigation? And so I say here, and I believe this is the more likely. Wonder what you think. Is this where the police come in what I believe is a corrupt fashion in terms of constructing the case around Lucy Letby? I'm going to move now back to the Hummingbird video, Operation Hummingbird on the Cheshire Police YouTube channel, because I'm going to start looking at what Detective Hughes says. In the Cheshire Police Operation Hummingbird video, after a short voiceover, an emotionally driven voiceover, we see and hear Detective Hughes, he's the lead detective in this case, saying that he knew Lucy Letby's name from the beginning and that she'd been moved off the ward. And his immediate question, he says in that video, well, why don't you go and why don't you go and arrest her right now? Why don't you go and arrest her right now? Which is a good question, he says. Quite difficult not to answer. Why don't you arrest her right now, as soon as he's arrived there? Well, that's obviously absolutely absurd to even say that. On what possible grounds could he arrest her? He hasn't, and no one has even established that there's been a crime at the hospital at that point. There's lots of finger pointing, but there's no crime. They have absolutely nothing. This is 2 months when he's saying this. He's talking retrospectively now about May when he first goes there, and he knows Lucy Letby's been moved off into admin. There's 2 months to go before the police get the bundles from the hospital and send them to Evans to even begin to look at, to determine if there is even anything suspicious at all. So here you can see really clearly what kind of fellow this Hughes guy is. You can see it. You can see it. The idea that it would have been a possibility even to arrest her is an absolute nonsense. It's absolute gibberish. Based on what? It's revelatory of his character. It's revelatory of what a slippery character he is. So he would have arrested her on the hunches of consultants, though, without any evidence as the crime at all, before he's even sent it to any expert to have it looked at. Because, so would that have been the basis of the arrest? On the hunches, and because Lucy just happened to be on duty, which coincides with the hunches of these consultants, or more accurately coincides with the consultants' campaign of persecution, scapegoating and blame against Lucy over the previous 2 years. Then in the Hummingbird video, we hear Hughes, SIO, Senior Investigating Officer, tell us, quote, "We've seen many times in investigations like this where we've gone the wrong way. Police nationally have gone the wrong way, jumped into a suspect, ... See, at this point, he's got no idea if there's any crimes to investigate, let alone thinking about a suspect. It's the doctors who have determined already that there's been a crime, and they have their suspect, and they have moved their suspect off the ward already. So here comes the disingenuousness of Hughes, his slipperiness, which leads into the corruption of the investigation. It's coming now in this following quote. Now, my view of that is," this is Hughes, "now my view of that is, by investigating that it could be anyone, means we're not focused on one person. So investigating that it could be anything means we're not focused on any one event. Which means that when you come later on and the defence want to attack your investigation for being, well, you chose it was Lucy Letby. You chose it was this event. No, we didn't choose that, and we didn't choose that. Actually, out of choice, I'd have wanted the expert to come back and said," he makes a mistake there, "and say, we found it. It was a bad bug in the water. And that happened. And I can tell the parents it was tragic, but this is not murder." So all that was his quote. All that was his quote. I'm going to deconstruct it now. We're going to look at it. This quote, everything he says there, and you can check and listen to it yourself. I've written it down. I don't think I've made any mistakes in what he's said there when I've transcribed it. This quote, this is about the pretense of giving the impression the investigation was not focusing just on one person, to create a fig leaf of a broad and open investigation that, in his words, could not be attacked further down the line. So it's all about time, this, and about putting things that have happened since back into a time when they didn't know it, or they weren't supposed to know it, weren't supposed to have attitudes back then that they're saying now that they're leaking out that they obviously did. So before Hughes even had a clue whether there was any criminality at all, could be the water, but we'll get on to the water thing, what he says. He's already wondering. He's telling us, this is what he's telling us. I'm not making it up. He's telling us this. He's already wondering how the defence will attack his investigation in a trial before he knows there's even been any crimes, before there's been any collation of notes about the babies, before Evans has even seen a single document, apparently. So Detective Hughes, he's telling us out of his own mouth how he is actually constructing the case around Lucy, while at the same time making it look as though he's doing the opposite and constructing, i.e. pretending and making a show of this apparent open investigative approach, wholly and solely in relation to what a defence barrister might do when, not if, when it gets to court. In other words, he's pretending to have or to take a wider ranged view, an open view as to who it might be. It could be anyone, even though I've been given a name and the nurse is no longer working there. I'm working in admin. One of the best nurses, one of the mainstay nurses, is no longer there. So he pretends he's got an open view as to who it might be, and even if there's any criminality there might not be anything there at all, but he's got the name and he's told us already, well, why didn't I arrest her? So he's contradicting himself all the time. This is clearly a piece of, on his behalf, of performative construction. Now he's performing in front of the camera as though he didn't do it and he hasn't done it, and that's not part of this dark heart of the Hummingbird Operation Hummingbird. It's a bit of theatre, really, and it involves, he's pretending he's not doing things that he says that police should not do. They shouldn't just fixate after one person, but that's actually what he's doing, and putting a fig leaf around it. He shouldn't jump into the suspect too soon, and he shouldn't go, as he puts it, the wrong way. But that's exactly what he's doing, while giving the appearance, the chimera, the cover that he's actually doing something else and leaving it all open. It could be it could be the bug. He's got no idea about the water bug at that point in time. He's not looking down that road at all. He's not interested in anybody else there. The consultants have told him who it is, and he's running with that, and he's going to give the appearance it's an open investigation, but really it's a fait accompli in his mind, and he's at the service of those consultants. There's no independent, individualised police investigative approach in this at all. He's at the service of those doctors and their long-held persecution of Lucy Letby, and the police just sort of underline that nicely for them, and we move on to the next dark part. What is further damning of Hughes here, and what is additionally suspicious, is his claim that he wanted the expert to come back and say, we found it. It was a bad bug in the water. And are we expected to believe this of him, really? That is what he really thought and wanted then? Absolute nonsense. I want to say something slightly stronger. For the following reasons, it's nonsense. Point A. How on earth is the quote-unquote expert going to determine anything to do with the water supply, looking at the medical records of the babies? How's he going to do that? Point B, even if point A was possible, even if it was possible to ascertain by some means or any means, why had the consultant or the hospital more generally not determined that there was any bug in the water? They do regular testing every month or so. What has the hospital been doing with regard to the water issue? Totally disregarding it? Well, possibly. But are we meant to believe that Evans is such a great mind, and Hughes believes this, that he can tell anything about the water supply by looking at the notes about the babies who died? He wasn't sent any test results regarding water. The water hadn't been tested in respect to this matter by anyone then or since in relation to these babies. Otherwise, there would have been an internal investigation about that. We would have heard about that. Breary's internal investigation that starts in July 2015 is all about who's on shift. They're not, unless anybody can tell me different, nothing's come out about them doing an internal evaluation of the pathogens that are there that are coming from the dodgy water system internally while it was all going on. I've not heard anything about that whatsoever. I don't believe it was presented at the trial that they said that that's what they were doing at the same time. No. I think they focused totally on Lucy, and they didn't deviate from that. Once that rumour train and that scapegoating had started, it only got bigger. It didn't get smaller. So back to Hughes. I mean, how on earth could Hughes think? How could he possibly think that Evans could come up with the answer? And this is just an example about Hughes now. This shows how he's lying. I don't care if he watches this. I think you're lying, Hughes. You're lying. This is how you're lying. He's backfilling from the recent trial, right? When the defence brought in the plumber, and he's backfilling and saying that he was hoping it was going to be a bad bug, and Evans would let them know, and he could tell the parents there weren't any murders. He's lying about that. You're lying, Detective Hughes. You're lying. At risk of flogging, I'll just carry on reading the rest of that I've written about this. You know, this is who this guy is, Hughes, this detective. Somebody will put that bit of information about the bad bug in the water, thinking that, knowing at the same time he's going after Lucy because the consultants did it in reality. So, you know, we're being asked to believe by Hughes that for nearly 2 years the consultants have not had the idea of considering it, that there's the bad bug in the water, but Evans is going to pull it off, like he pulls everything off for them, you know, and that could be the cause of the deaths. Or the hospital management more generally. They've not looked into it, but Evans can know. Evans will know. If anyone knows anything at all, it's Evans. You know, but Hughes will come along and he'll sort it out. Well, Hughes will be, you know, this lumbering, stumbling, grinning meathead. He tells us that he's hoping his expert can solve it. You know, he's never even set foot in that hospital as far as we know. By telling everyone it was a bad bug in the water from looking at the baby's medical records. And what would that make the hospital as a whole then? And it's just ridiculous. It shows, it demonstrates, exemplifies how slippery and duplicitous this Hughes character is. So I did points A and B there, didn't I? So there's a third one, C. Had Hughes at any time had any engagement early on in the department with the estates management or plumbing regarding the water system? I don't believe so. I don't believe that's what happened. Well, we've not heard that anyway. I think all that came much later, and it was drawn in as a matter of defence. That's not the direction Hughes wanted to go, because it would be exculpatory. He didn't want to go down that line. He had somebody in his sights because he didn't know anything. He's just taken that from the consultants though, and he's replicated it. He's got Lucy in his sights. He's got the suspect there, and he says, well, why didn't I arrest her? Well, you know, I'm just waiting to build my case, then I'll arrest her, and I will, and I'll do it in 2018. So yeah, his claim about believing in the hoping for the bad water answer from Dewi Evans is just absolute. It's a lie. It's a lie, and it's an insult to anyone listening. It's an insult, and it's a measure of the man. So, you know, Hughes was wholly and solely guided by the consultants, who already had their choice list of cases ready to go, i.e. all the ones that they had suspected Lucy over for the best part of 2 years. So, wow, I mean, thanks if you stuck with me for this amount of time, stuck with the video. I've spent a long time getting to this now. We need to go back to why the 30 plus cases were sent by the hospital to the police, who then sent them on to Evans in whatever form, whether physical or, you know, there's a disparity there. Anyway. And from those 30 plus cases, more than half were easily explainable by Evans. He says so himself in the interview. He tells us, easily explainable. You know, just, yeah, they're fine. And, you know, which is obviously, that's wasted all the time and effort in producing those bundles. The hospital's done that. Why have they done it? Why have they been chosen? So easily dismissed by good old Evans, yet apparently of concern enough to create bundles to send to the police, which are then sent on to Evans. You know, apparently they were of concern to somebody, but Evans can whip through them like a hot knife through butter and just leave the ones that he knows, which all happen to be, you know, you guessed it, Lucy cases. Anyway, I said apparently of concern. Those other cases, the ones that were jettisoned, apparently of concern to the consultant and hospital. But of course, I think the consultants knew very well that those 16 or 17 easily explainable ones were not of concern at all, but they were put in there to send to the police, to Evans, to make it look as though the police were not just sending the Lucy-related cases, that the hospital were not just sending the Lucy-related cases, because that would look bad and be attackable by the defence further down the line. as Hughes makes it very clear, you don't want to do. You don't want to make it look bad. It doesn't matter if it is bad, but you don't want to make it look bad. And it would be a point of attack for when, as he says, for when, not if it, when it comes to court, for when it comes to court. And here it is. Here's the other option to it. When I said, was it just the consultant's idea to put these obviously explainable deaths that Evans could just throw away and say, no, they're fine, there's nothing wrong with them. Throw away in terms of, of no concern, probably not the best phrase, to put to the side. Here it is. This is the one I think that's more likely that's happened. I don't think it was just them that did it. I think they were advised by the police to do it. I think maybe the consultant said, yeah, we know all the cases that we're worried about. These are the Lucy cases. And the police go, well, you don't kind of want to send just them. You don't kind of just want to send just them to the expert because, as and when it does go to court, when it goes to court, they'll say, well, you only looked at the Lucy cases. What about all the other ones? You've got to kind of add a few other ones in there. So it looks as though we've got a broad range of approach here, that we're not going after one person or one subset of events. Got to make it believable. The term plausible deniability comes in here. So I believe that it was the police, Hughes and his colleagues, idea to bulk up the submission of cases to be looked at by Evans, to bulk them up beyond the 15 that they already knew Evans would reduce it down to, with all these easily explainable ones, with a lot that could be dismissed easily, to leave only the Lucy-related cases which they wanted to achieve. So when they go through the rotas and everything, and Lucy's ticking all of them, they had that in that mind already before they'd even gone through the rotas. They knew where they wanted to get. They just had to get there, and they had to get there with plausible deniability. They wanted to make it look as though that discovery that you see that when they made much of that in the court, showing it up, look, tick, 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 cross, 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 all by Lucy's name with all the events happening. They wanted to make it look as though that was an organic discovery, that all was fair and above board. I believe the police advised the consultants to not just gather the Lucy cases, but to, add some others in. So I know I'm repeating myself, but I've written this down. I'll read it. But to add some others in so it doesn't just look like we're going for Lucy, because we could be attacked in court. But obviously they were just going after Lucy. The consultants, the police, and then Evans. They were all just going after Lucy all the way through, from the beginning, all the way through, never considering the bad water, never looking into that at all. That's something that Hughes has put back in after the trial to make it sound as though he did. I don't want to find any. No, he doesn't. I don't want to find any murders. No. I want it to be the bad water, so I don't have to tell the parents. No, he wants a scalp. He wants Lucy. The consultants want Lucy. They've wanted Lucy for 2 years almost. The consultants. Then the police want Lucy, and then Evans wants Lucy. And this is what happens in the classical witch trial idea. The first accusers wants the person accused. And then you get the sort of middle level judges coming in, or the police coming in. Oh God, that this person's a witch. Yeah, we'll look into that. And then you get the witch trial judges come in from some other part of the county. And then they want that person as well. It's this tertiary, step by step, focusing on and scapegoating of an individual. They all wanted Lucy, and only Lucy, and nobody else. And they all knew it, but they had to build, to conspire to build a fake house with all these extra cases around it to make it look as though it's a proper investigation. Yeah, no, we're not being partial. We're not just going after a person because somebody said some rumours. No, they built this fake house around it that would easily be dismissed by Evans to make it look as if they're not going after Lucy. I know I've repeated a lot, but it's the kind of thing you go over and over it, and I just think it's there. It is what the title of this video is going to be, The Dark Heart of Operation Hummingbird, because here is where the darkness and the rot is right at the beginning, and it doesn't become pure after that. It gets more and more sinister and evil and rotten as it goes on, more and more, until you end up with an innocent young woman in prison for the rest of her life. But we need an appeal, and that's what's going to happen. And I believe Lucy will be freed, but it should be as soon as possible. This is the dark heart. This is the functionality of what creates the dark heart of the so-called police investigation, which is actually run, as I've said before, by the consultants, in effect, on one side and Evans on the other, with the police wanting a big case. That's their ego trip for them. That's their feather in their cap, and they're more of their funding. They're a bit of fame, actually. All these factors play in. Coming towards the end now, I just want to say a short final note, is that I'll go over in a later video regarding Evans's claim not to have known Lucy's name, because there's more to come out in his Talk TV interview, which I've sort of got to do the other stages, the other parts too still, which I'll cover some of the same ground as I have in here, but it all bears repetition again and again and again, I believe. So I'm going to do that. The idea that he didn't know her name, while at the same time as going through the bundles of over 30 cases, which he reduces very easily, so he tells us, to 15. The 15 in which Lucy, in her role as a nurse, is the most salient nurse name that he's seeing thousands of times, the most common and continuous name that he is reading thousands of times, her name, her initials, in thousands of pieces of paper of these 15 cases that he says are suspicious. And he claims, I had no idea, I did not know Lucy Letby's name at that point, I had never heard of her, or anyone else actually, but I've been reading these things, I've been looking at thousands of pieces of paper with her name all over it. Sorry, got a bit... Okay, where am I? Yes, and so later he then makes the pretense of, he says, advising the hospitals, check your rosters and everything and just see who was on duty. I mean, I've got no idea myself, I wonder who it could be. He knows, and the police know, and the consultants know, that checking of the rosters is another piece of artificiality, another piece of absolute theatre, to get the result they already know they've got, to get the result they know they want, to get the result they know they'd prepared for and ensured, which is that list of all the ticks, all the crosses by Lucy's name. And they got it, and they used it in court massively to sway the jury. But as said, more about that and more reiteration of that, and hopefully more detail on that in a later video with regard to Talk TV video of Evans, and obviously more on the Hummingbird video in a further video. I'll do more deconstruction of that as well. There's so much here, sometimes it's just hard to know the ordering and where to start and what bits to combine at which point, but I really thank anyone that's got this far and listening to this, what I've done today. I know I'm repeating, and I think that's okay, because it's the kind of thing you repeat again in your mind, and yes, is that right? Is that likely? And I just think there's a lot in this. Well, I know there is. I will absolutely say from the heart that I believe this is the dark heart of Operation Hummingbird, and this is where the injustice and the crime against Lucy begins in earnest. It was going on in the hospital from the consultants for 2 years, the persecution. But this is the systematic crime is beginning to take shape and harden around her like a trap, with the police being involved and this bastard Evans. Okay, I'll leave it there before I say anything else. Thanks. Cheers. Thank you.